to Boss Uncaged podcast. So today's show is going to be an interesting show because we're going to be talking to a person that I'm going to deem the clarity boss, and we're really going to dive into like value propositions. And those that know me, like value proposition and delivering value is like the first thing that you need to do. Period. No matter what you're doing, whether you're branding, setting up businesses, setting up strategies, is you got to have to establish your value for your customer segments. So the floor is yours, Mike. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
I say first off, thanks, buddy. I really appreciate you having me on today. I love your podcast. You deliver some great content. So to really keep it really simple is, what I do is I work with professional service professionals and entrepreneurs and business people who struggle with how to really clearly identify what their unique value proposition is and what their overall purpose is. I found that so many people struggle with that. And it keeps them stuck. It keeps them from going forward in developing their business. I really target a lot of my efforts on folks who are just like me, but just maybe a few steps, behind, meaning that I've been in the entrepreneurial space now for over 20 years as an attorney and as a real estate developer. And, my wife and I developed a really successful network marketing business. So I've had a very diverse background. And through that, I've developed a lot of really great insight, made a lot of mistakes on the way, developed a lot of wisdoms through some really, bad decisions. But the point is how do you pay it forward in a meaningful way? So what I found after coaching so many people through the years and interviewing people and mentoring people through the process, so many of them get stuck in their head on what it is that's unique about them, and then carving it out with real specificity, so that they could really bring it to market and then stick with it and have the belief to stick with it, because you have to have belief in yourself to get into the world of self-employment, entrepreneurship, all those situations where you're kind of operating without a safety net.
Hmm. So I mean, I think just taking some segments of what you just said. I mean, being into construction, being a lawyer, and being into like other items that you listed off. Like, I mean, obviously there's multiple different value propositions in each one of those. Like, how did you kind of like take those value propositions from the past, and how are you using them today?
That's a great question. The reason why I came up with this is because I struggled with it.
Hmm.
Right, because we all are looking, if we're looking to really develop, a lifestyle that we really want, right? We go out there, we take risks, and we don't know what we don't know many times. So a lot of us, will pursue paths with the sole intention of, having the quote unquote success or getting the money or whatever the heck that means. But at the end of the day, we don't understand kind of really what the impacts are of our movements until after the fact, right? So I've done a lot of interesting things, but really it came to the point of, when I really backing it up like to 2008, when I was in real estate development, and I was my initial purpose of getting involved in real estate development shifted. And then I got caught up like so many other people in the 2008 meltdown. And I found myself having to completely redefine who I was. And it was like a major identity crisis. Okay. That was like kind of the first time when I started to realize, I had never done any personal development before, never done anything that really understood how to kind of transcend my value proposition beyond just myself. Right. But you learn these things, and as we get into the story, I'm sure I'll kind of uncover kind of what happened with me
Hmm.
that had that kind of that light bulb moment where I was like, oh, okay, I see what where this is at. And then through this process, it's been an ongoing journey. It's one of my great mentors is saying, he always says that you always must be willing to pay the price, but recognize the price will never fully be paid. So you got to constantly invest in yourself, constantly re-engage, constantly put yourself in a situation where you're a student always.
Nice, nice. So I mean, one of the key words that you just brought up was like definition and defining who you are. So like my next question is based upon that. I mean, we're going to get clear, right? Using one of your terminologies, it's like how do you define yourself? And if you did define yourself, like if you could use 3 to 5 words, what would those 3 to 5 words be?
Well, it's funny. I feel that at this stage in my life, as a 51-year-old person who's done a lot, it's what I've done to develop, a B state of who I am, where I'm really consciously aware of who I am. All right. And then I move every day with purposeful intention of doing the things that I know that I could operate at my highest and best level. Okay. That is a place where the only way that happens is really intentionally pursuing it. Okay. And being able to look at yourself objectively, having other people, give you insight, being open to that insight, and just constantly pushing yourself and putting yourself out there where, you learn new ways about who you are. But then it's a matter of then understanding, like, what do you do on a consistent basis that seemed to be a theme? And what with me it was always this process of mentoring and, mentoring people and coaching people and advising people. I mean, I'm a lawyer, right? So I've been a lawyer for, I graduated in 98 and I've had a very diverse background in the legal world. And, I've had countless experiences in the legal space. But, what I always found with working with my clients, even in the legal side, is, I want to bring more value other than just being a highly paid tactician. They come to you because they're looking for, a real, a person who is a real, valued confidant, someone who is someone who they can get information from, where, I think you have an obligation to do that. So there's been many, many times, like my legal background, because I grew up in the real estate business, right, as a construction guy. And then I developed a background in land use and things. So in commercial real estate, residential real estate. So a lot of my clients are, in the real estate space. So I lived in that space for so many years that there's many times, I mean, as recently as yesterday, I had a client and I talked to them about, how do they really understand how to develop a real intelligent investment strategy based upon, some more self-reflection, right? Because people can go down a really crazy path just because they're not really clear on what they ultimately want. And they're just kind of following what they think has to happen or what other people have told them. So I feel that if you can help people to get really purposefully an alignment, with their purpose and their highest and best use, which I love to kind of use that term, then I think I'm doing then I know I'm providing them with value that is meaningful.
Interesting. So, I mean, you brought up real estate. So let's say like I'm a real estate investor, right? And let's say I'm looking at property and I'm looking at land, and obviously there's a lot of different variables and factors that go into real estate investment. What would you help a real estate investor come to terms with? Like, and what are you going to help them get clear with? Let's say if they're going to make $100 million deal, would you be able to help them transition into?
Well, most of the situations I deal with are more along the lines of folks who are, I don't want to say newbies, but people who are just entering into or transitioning. If you get people who are kind of in an institutional situations or work for a larger firm, they understand very clearly what their investment formula is, what type of property they're looking to build, have a very clear trajectory on how they're building and maintaining their portfolio. Those folks are amazing. I sometimes can help those people in other areas, primarily when, those folks who are working in corporate situations and they want to do something on their own, how they create the mindset to shift from a kind of corporate environment to being on their own. That's a whole different ballgame. But for the newbie, right? For the people who want to do something or build something, and they don't necessarily have all of the experience. You can read all the books you want. You could, you can go to the seminars. You could do, and those are phenomenal. Right? You absolutely need to do them. But having someone, kind of give them real-time insight, because I've paid the price by making really bad investments based upon really not having the right type of guidance and mentorship. So a perfect example is, like I said, I mean, the folk who, so I deal with all types of people, but a lot of times, like just happened yesterday, honestly, it was like, hey, why are you actually making these investments? Like, what's the real purpose? What is your real end game, right? And understanding that these folks need to have a real strategic game plan, and they need a real, I always tell folks, you develop your strategy, right? And then you assign tactics on how to develop, to achieve that strategy, but recognizing that those tactics are going to change. Right. And one of the things that I find specifically when you start getting into the real estate investment business is the timelines associated with, development approvals and things like that. It can get really complicated really, really quickly. And for someone who doesn't really understand that, they need someone to guide them, and that's what I do on that side of the equation, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So let's just continue down that path and ad lib your story into it, right? So, like, how did you come to find like your own personal clarity? Because I mean, obviously, you're helping others find their clarity. You've done the legal route, you've done the investment, you've done the building. But when on that journey did you find your clarity and was able to say, you know what, I found it. Now I can kind of deliver it to someone else.
Yeah. So it's a great question. So, looking back, and like I told you, '08. I was very much up until '08. I was very much caught up in, doing the day to day. I had a family business with me and my brother and my father. Again, I'm a guy who, 15 years old, I was on construction sites. My dad threw us on the construction sites. I paid my way through, school and in college, working construction, right? Running the jobs, doing the whole thing. So when you're doing that, you're in the space, you're doing it, right? You're in the moment, right? So it wasn't until, like I said, '08, when that all happened, because again, it's a very long story, but ultimately, I kind of did legal work. I got out of legal shortly in the 2000 to work for a legal publishing company because I really enjoyed sales. So I did really well in sales for a legal publishing company. It's now Thomson Reuters, which is a huge company. But when I was involved, it was a much smaller privately held company. So in any event, did really well, started buying real estate. I figured, okay, let me start building my portfolio and my initial intention was I wanted to build a mixed use, investment portfolio. But like with everything else, we started flipping houses, and then before you know it, we had 5 employees, and we're building spot houses, and we're doing flips and renos and all those types of things, and it worked well, until, like I said, until we were the quintessential people who were working, in the business and not necessarily on the business, which happens all the time. But I don't think anyone really anticipated the level of the impact of '08. I mean, it was the first time, obviously, where the financial markets and the real estate markets just collapsed because of the nature of what was happening with the security vehicles that were tied into bad loans. So, not to get into that situation, but up until that point, I was always in just doing, right? Then I had to go through this process of evaluating what I needed to do. I started going back to legal work again on an ongoing basis. And I'll tell you a really funny story. I was, like most people, just trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do with myself? It was extremely challenging. I'm not going to, it's a part of the story. It was really challenging, but I was struggling. I was really upset and angry and frustrated. And I'll never forget it. At the time, I was just picking myself up by the bootstraps, getting back involved in doing legal work. And I was representing a guy at a municipal court, right? And for a suspended driver's license. And the way it works is it's primarily all the lawyers, go and meet with the prosecutor prior to, the case, so you can kind of, work it all out. So I was going to this court really early. And very long story short, I had just had a huge argument with my wife, and I, we've been together since we're kids. So, we really have shared all these things together, but had a really bad argument, really pissed, angry. I go to this municipal court and I'm sitting there, and I guess my energy was so bad, right, that a guy who I'd never met before ever in my life comes up to me and he says, "You need to read the 4 agreements." And I said, "What?" And I'm a very amiable guy, but I kind of had a little bit of a chip, like what? What are you talking about? He's like, "You need to read the 4 agreements." He said, "I was just like you until I, I read that book and it changed my life.
Hmm.
Now, what was really cool is that most people may have just blown that off. I didn't. I bought the book. And it was one of the first times that I started to realize that I can put the inner chatter that we all have into some type of context and understand why it's there. Right. So that was like the beginning of the process for me. And ultimately it was one of those situations that I was involved in. It was, this was a long time ago. This is, when it first started, but that was the stepping stone. That was the moment where I realized that, okay, there's something to this, to understand the power of quieting the inner mind, right? And understanding that there could be a way to move forward without beating myself up so much. Now, granted, we're human. We all do it, but if you can put it into context, right? And again, there's been a lot of journeys that came through since that time, but that was the first part for me. And then what wound up happening is about 2012, middle of 2012, my wife and I were actually living in a house that I had actually built. It was one of the houses that got left over in the series of houses that we had built that I got stuck with. And it was not a good situation. We were living in bad energy, right? That house had bad energy. I don't know if you've ever been in that space, but and we would be fighting about this house all the time. So at one point I said, I looked at my wife, my wife's name's Desiree. I'm like, you know what, Des, I'm putting this house on the market. I don't care how much money I lost. I don't care how much money I'm going to lose. We need to clear the slate. And we did. And during that time, we had been introduced to a network marketing business. Now, we didn't know what that was all about, but we were looking for additional streams of income because ultimately it boiled down to we were, at that time I started to work for a law firm again, and my wife was working for a pharmaceutical company. And, from the outside, we were doing great. We both had good jobs. We were both professionals, 6 figures, the whole, all the BS that surrounds that. But, I'd come home 10:30 at night, exhausted. She'd still be working. We're like, something's got to give. Something's not working here. And lo and behold, we kind of started to figure out how we're going to do this. So I talked to my wife, I said, lawyers, what do lawyers do? Like we don't, if we need to get the answer to something, we hire an expert. So that's what I was very fortunate that at the time, like I said, we were kind of involved with a network marketing company that just by the nature of it, we started to do pretty well. And we got invited to a leadership conference. And during that time, a business coach's name continuously came up over and over and over again. So I looked over to my wife. I'm like, we got to maybe tap into this, this resource, because whatever he's teaching these folks, they seem to be having success. And lo and behold, on the flight home, we ran into a guy who was heading our way. And it so happened to be that he was coaching with this fella. And I said, hey, can I have his number? And I got the number and I called him. And I'll never forget it. I called him on a Sunday and he picked up, which was kind of strange. And after talking to him, within about 15 minutes, I realized I need to hire this guy. And that was the guy who really introduced us to how to really lean into developing an income that was, that was a residual based income, where we really started to understand where the network marketing world would go. We wound up shifting companies, going to another company called Isogenics, which is a great health and wellness company. My wife continues to work in that business every day, but we had built up a big enough team where we were able to leave our jobs and start this process and guide and start mentoring people. And it was through that is where a lot of this personal development journey happened. I always tell folks it was like the entrepreneurial proving ground, right? So it was a very interesting and dynamic story and experience that I'm really grateful now that as I look back, because of this diverse background that I've had over the 20 some odd years, I can now bring it full circle to really be able to coach and mentor people. And so I started doing this coaching, in 2018.
Okay.
With real, people were hiring me to do the coaching, not necessarily, just through on our team and things like that. And then I realized that, I really love it. And I always loved the coaching aspect and the consulting aspect of lawyering, but I didn't like the whole litigation aspect of it. I just despised it. And so it became a perfect fit for me.
So I mean, I'm just listening to everything you just said, and I just want to kind of like, I'm not going to be able to recap all of it, but I think ideally, based upon what you just said, if you can go back, and again, like that was a time frame of time, right? Let's say that's 10 years, 20 years. What's one thing that you would probably want to change to do differently if you could do it again?
That's a great question. So I would say the one thing I would change is not be so hard on myself.
Hmm. Hmm. That's definitely an interesting answer. So I mean, that kind of leads me into like your upbringing, right? So being that you wouldn't be hard on yourself, I would think that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is any of your family members or ancestors potentially entrepreneurs? And again, you've jumped into multiple different businesses and you've been successful in some of them as well, but some of that insight had to come from probably before you. Could you attest to that?
Well, I came from New Jersey. Okay. My family is all from South Philadelphia and they came from Italy. So it was, worker mentality. My father and his brother were the first kind of guys who left the neighborhood, so to speak. My dad became a junior draftsman, and then he wound up getting involved in, like I said, in real estate and real estate development and contracting. And that's kind of how he raised his two boys, right? I have a sister as well, but I was the youngest. And and then my grandfather on my mother's side was a shipbuilder. He worked in the shipyards in Philly. And he was an orphan. He was actually, I shouldn't say he was an orphan. He was actually put in a home at 7 years old. So, when you think back and he lived an amazing life. He died at 96. I had him write his stories down. He was an amazing guy. Right. And I loved him. He was just lived enough for 17 people's lives. Right. And talk about putting things in context. When you have someone who you can talk to who kind of lived through the Depression, right? But needless to say, that mindset, right, of that worker mindset, again, it's a noble thing, but if we can get beyond that, right? So many of us from that kind of culture, it's always just, you can be really hard on yourself, right? You don't ever think that you can kind of rise above. And even when you do, if you don't change your mindset, you're still operating at that level. Mm-hmm. And that's where I found myself, right? I found myself, even though I got an accounting degree, I went to law school, I was doing all the things that I thought I had to do. But I didn't understand that I had to change my mindset. And unless and until I did, I lived in a space of overwhelm, anxiety, frustration, right? All these things that they don't really lead to anywhere other than just, burnout and really, in my opinion, and in my case, it was just, I wasn't living in a place where I felt empowered.
Got it. So, I mean, with that, I mean, earlier on, you were talking about your wife. You talked about you guys kind of grew up together. You've been in a long time relationship, and it seems like you guys been business partners as well. So, like, my next question is like, how do you guys currently juggle and manage your work life with your family life?
Great, that's a great question. We ran the business together for 5 years, and then we got to the point where we said, I think, we love each other and we want to make this thing work. And we were two stubborn Italian, Leos. Okay. So we realized that it was better off to just, let me do what suits my strongest, my highest and best use. And then my wife Des, she went into her direction. So we worked together, and in that sense. So, the whole idea, and anybody who's in a long-term relationship, and, we met when we were 15 years old. So we're together. We met each other March 31st, 1986. So you could do the math. It's a long time ago. So, you have to learn how to have a healthy interdependence, but not an unhealthy codependence. You see
Interesting.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what we learned, and this is what's the ongoing journey. No, no one operates every day. I always tell folks this is it. We're living life, right? I mean, all the things that happened then still happen now. We just learn and develop tools to be able to not have it impact our life as much, right? And just be able to move on and not attach to the emotions and things like that. It's an ongoing process, right? But you have to be dedicated to it. So we operate very much in that space where I support her in everything I possibly could, in every way I possibly could, and she supports me.
Nice, nice. So I mean, going back to like I'm a real good listener, so I was just kind of like taking pinpoints of what you've been saying this entire conversation. And earlier on, you was talking about the value add that you got from someone that you didn't know that brought a book to your attention, and then you went out and bought the book and read the book. So this next question is: any additional books besides that one book that you had the opportunity to read that gave you great value that you would like to recommend to our listener?
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, some of these books are a little bit older, but they're classics, right? And the second book that I delved into was a book by Brian Tracy, and it was called The Psychology of Achievement, which is a great book. It really helps the person understand, like I said, to kind of recognize, what the mindset of people who achieve goals are. Right. There's a designated set of characteristics and traits that are there that the faster we can delve into that and understand where they are, and then begin to how that we can kind of get on that journey to mastering those traits, how it suits our life, the better. So that was a great, great, great book. And everybody knows Think and Grow Rich. I mean, Napoleon Hill, it's the classic. I mean, a lot of these are, but as far as updated books, I'm a huge proponent and I love Audible. So I do Audible and I do Kindle, and sometimes some deeper books that it's hard to keep my attention. Like I'll read and hear it simultaneously, so it kind of drills down in my head. So right now, like I love, I'm reading a few books simultaneously. And I love Donald Miller's books. I don't know if you ever heard of Donald Miller, but he's a great author. He's a business, he's a marketer and a kind of like a branding expert. He does great books. He writes great business books. So I love his book, Business Made Simple. I'm reading that right now. Another great book that I kind of coach and mentor people through a lot is a book called Letting Go by David Hawkins. That's an amazing book. Amazing book. It's deep. It's a little heavy. It's a little dense, but highly recommend. He also wrote a great book called Power versus Force, which is even a little bit more dense, but worth the read. These are repeated listenings, right? These aren't one and doners. I just read a really great book too by Raja Manar, who was the former CEO of MasterCard. And it's the book called Quantum Marketing, which is really cool because, drilling back to kind of what I do now, I'm working with a lot of service professionals. Like I said, I'm 51 years old, right? So I came up, like I'm in that Generation X world where, our approach to handling, approaching our career, what our career trajectory was, what we thought back then versus where we are now, because we're in the information age, and no one would have expected in a million years to the extent to which information would dictate and how impactful social media is and all these types of things. A lot of the professionals who I work with, they don't have those skills. They don't know how to, develop kind of like a brand for themselves on LinkedIn. They don't really engage in LinkedIn. They don't understand how to truly monetize their network, how to create, meaningful connections with folks, because they've been tacticians for a lot of their life. So, I work on that quite a bit. So I always recommend to them to listen to that book or read the book Quantum Marketing, because it does kind of just tell you exactly kind of where we're going. Right. It's kind of, it can be a little daunting when, it's hard to put our heads around, but technology, man, is
So I mean, you talk about like where we're going. So I mean, obviously, you talked about your journey and how you transitioned from being a lawyer and you went into real estate, and now you're part motivational speech and also self-help development. Where do you see yourself 20 years from now?
Well, I'll be 71. So I hope at that point I had built. My goal now is I really want to build. I want to build a company and a business that has an infrastructure where I can provide opportunities for other people to thrive. That's my goal and my job. That's how I feel right now. And that's what I'm doing. You know, one brick at a time. It takes time. I love developing and maintaining really strong collaborative relationships with people who I'm in alignment with. I have a variety of different investments in different things too. I've learned to be really mindful of kind of where I invest my time and things like that. But I mean, where I envision myself at 71 is just continuing to level up, right, and be active and engaged in my life, right, to continue to live with that purposeful intention and make contributions that are meaningful to other people.
Nice, nice. So, I mean, spinning off of that, right? And earlier on, you kind of alluded to like your ideal avatar as essentially an individual in the real estate space. So, if you could leave that person some final insight, words of wisdom, words of clarity, what would those words be?
Well, I mean, depending on where they are, I mean, whether they be professionals or, like I said, maybe a real estate investor. I talk to those folks like let's just say let's say a real estate agent,
Hmm.
say, right? I mean, the reality is they have to understand that they live in a very crowded space. We live in a space where you have to develop skills that go above and beyond. And what I mean skills, what I mean by skills is marketing, branding skills, right? Presentation skills, being able to develop a brand message or a core messaging that kind of hits people on a visceral level, right? Because they live in very crowded spaces. You know, realtors, it's a saturated market, right? I mean, and you see the people who break out are obviously the ones who obviously do perform their job really, really, really well. But the fact is, if you're a real estate agent and you're performing really, really well, but you're not keeping up with the times on how to connect with people effectively, then, there's going to be a person who may not be as good as quote unquote a realtor you are, but if they understand how to leverage the tools around them, they're going to start grabbing your market share. So those are things that's what I would tell them is to lean into this, right? Lean into the technology as best as you can and also get help, right? That's a whole nother situation is, we all are so conditioned to, do it on our own. And that would be one of the key things that I would say. I mean, get help, because I know for me, I have mentors and coaches who have coached me through the years and still do. And I learned so much from them because they're further along than I am. Right. So I need to, that's what I would say for them.
Nice. So, this person is listening right now. How do they get in contact with you?
Easiest way I would say is to just connect with me on LinkedIn, Michael J. Coluzzi. Right. I have a website. It's mikecoluzzi.com, but I'm revamping it. And I'd rather them just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. You could do a DM, right? Or obviously I have, other social media handles, but I'd say that's the easiest and best way. Just go on LinkedIn, look me up, send me a connection, say, hey, I heard you on essays. I heard you on essays podcast and I'd love to connect with you. It's that simple. And then, from that point, we'll, develop a relationship and see how I can help people. I love to give, to connect with people on Zoom and spend about 20 minutes, half hour, seeing how I may be able to help them
Hmm.
and make meaningful connections.
Great, great. So that leads us to the bonus round, and I got a couple insightful bonus questions for you. So the first one is just looking into your background. If you had to pick between jiu-jitsu and drumming, which one would you pick?
That's great. I love it. Well, I would say probably as far as what moving forward, that was the question.
Just period. I mean, which one would you pick if you had
Oh,
one on
oh,
one side and one on the other side?
I love jujitsu.
Okay. Okay.
I love jujitsu, and the reason why I love jujitsu is because I got introduced to jujitsu through a business coach
Hmm.
because who had been teaching Muay Thai fighters and was a martial artist himself. And I said, I want to be put in a situation where I could learn to overcome my feelings of anxiety.
Hmm.
That when I'm put in situations that I don't go into panic mode. And he said, start jujitsu.
Hmm.
Now, I had not been on a mat since I graduated high school in 1988. I used to be a wrestler. And one of the, but the point is what I've learned being on those mats in the community surrounding jujitsu and just the challenges associated with that is just something that I love.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what's your favorite submission then?
Well, it's funny. My favorite submission is, if anything, it's called a bow and arrow choke, which is a really brutal choke. But I learned it. I'm pretty good at taking the back and kind of staying on. Now I'm an older guy. I'm 51, like I said, so I roll with a lot of guys. I roll with people from all different walks of life, but I find, generally speaking, if I'm going to do submissions, and I had to pick one, I love that choke. It's brutal, but it's very effective. And I love the rolls, man. I just love the rolls. I love flow rolling with people. And then, like where I go now is like tonight, for example, is a great night because tonight's like comp night. We all we pair off, and then we have like individual competitions, and I love it, man. I highly recommend it to anyone.
Nice. Nice. So, got another bonus question. Excuse me for a second. If you could spend 24 hours with anyone, dead or alive, uninterrupted for those 24 hours, who would it be and why?
Well, here's my thoughts on that. I'd like to connect with somebody who's in the moment,
Mm.
right? And one who comes to mind, honestly, and I know he's been in the news recently because for whatever reason I don't want to get into, but I love Rogan because Rogan has been able to really be a pioneer
Mhm.
and kind of walk forward and speak his own truth and say what you want about him, but he's extremely authentic, and I love that, and I love the fact that he's had the balls, quite frankly, to just be his own man, and I love that guy. I mean, I there's a lot of other people and everything else, but like for me, is just a dude who I'd like to have a hang with and kind of, there's probably a lot of cool things that we'd be able to talk about. And I love what he's done. I mean, the guy he has branched out into made, and kind of got to the point where all I have to say is Rogan and we know who we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and plus, if you get into a bar fight with him, he has your back as well
Yeah,
too.
well, that's true too. Well, yeah. Well, what's funny with jujitsu guys, and most of us, like we always know, like, you stay away from the bars and you never go to a bar during a UFC fight because
Yeah,
all the guys get beer muscles and they have no idea what they're doing. So, most of us who are doing this, we get all our aggression out on the mats.
yeah,
We're not interested in, you know,
yeah. Rear naked chokes in bars is probably not the best thing to be
no,
doing.
no, no, no. But the Rogan, I love that guy, man. I think he's freaking great.
Good, good. So I got one last bonus question for you. Being that you had so many different like life achievements, right? So what is your most significant achievement currently to date outside of like your family or your wife?
I would say doing what I'm doing now because it was a culmination, man. Like for where I am now, it took all that to
Mm.
get here. There's a lot of blood, sweat, tears, frustration, anger, losses. I mean, it's not an easy place to get to the point where you're like, okay, you know what, I'm going to put my stake in the ground
Hmm.
and I'm going to move forward, and be confident enough to embrace the journey,
Hmm.
because there's days when it's not easy, as you're an entrepreneur, and I'm learning a lot about myself and how I can help other people and what I have to do to improve to be able to be more effective. So I'm proud of where I am, and it took a lot of heartache to get here, but it was worth it.
Nice, nice. So this is like we're coming down to like the end of the podcast, and I love that when I'm interviewing someone that with as much tenacity that you have, I would like to make you the host of the show for see if you have any questions that you would like to ask me.
Well, what I would like to ask you is, I mean, I love the fact that you are, you're very intentional with what you do. So I mean, I know we don't have much time left, but what was the life lesson that you had, what you realized that you had to, in order to move forward, you had to do it with real term of art that I use is purposeful intention. I mean, I gave you a compliment at the beginning where I loved you set reminders every day. Everything I see that you're doing is very intentional. What was it? What was that light bulb moment for you when you realized that's how you had to operate?
That's a unique question. I mean, usually I get the question about like what was the inspiration to kind of change my direction, but what you're asking about is more so like the strategy behind it. And for me, it was kind of like early on, I was trying to figure out if I was a creative person, and I knew I was a creative person, but I didn't really know that I was analytical as well.
Mhm.
So through over the years, then I realized that I was both 50% analytical and 50% creative. So I had to kind of make them work for each other. So a lot of times my viewpoints and the way I look at things are uniquely different. And I was like, how do I take that information and create strategies? So once
Mhm.
I realized that strategy was a thing that it was tangible for me to reach out to in the last 10 years, I started implementing these strategies. And then as I implemented these strategies, I started to get creative with it. Like you're saying with the 5 emails, right? That was something like learning from example. Like I'm not a big person on tripping so many different times. How can I stop this from happening again? Well, usually nine
Was
out of
there
10
was
times.
there one defining moment where you realized, like, you know what, I see kind of like I have that moment of clarity where this was something where you realize, because you made a really good point, and that is, when you realize kind of if you're left brain or right brain, I'm like you, I am split right down the middle. And it can be challenging sometimes. So, was there something that happened in your life where you've said, okay, I kind of see where I am here and I know I'm going to move forward with, understanding kind of how I operate? Was there something that happened?
Yeah, it happened early on in college. When I first went to college, I was a graphic designer by trade, and I had all these friends that were graphic designers, and I saw their passion for design, which I also had. But then there was something that was missing from the equation that they didn't have. Like they all could, look at art, look at paint, and love it and stay in that space. But for me, it was like technology kept calling me, and it was just kind of like there's something else outside of art. So then once I realized those two halves, that's when I became whole.
Very cool. Very cool, man. And how long you been at it now on your doing? I know you've been doing the podcast for a fairly good
Yeah,
bit of time, but
podcast is this is season 3, so roughly my 2.5 years. But I've been on the entrepreneur since I was in college, and I really didn't go into it full time until I got full custody of my son, roughly about 12 years ago, 12, 11 years ago. So I've been at it for about close going on 15 years.
very cool, man. That's good stuff. And did you choose? I mean, do you feel that you use podcasting? As a podcaster, are you do you love? I mean, are you a podcaster for the sake of podcasting, or do you find that you're using podcasting as a vehicle for other things?
I'm a growth strategist by nature, and it took me a while to realize that. So, like, once I kind of stepped from behind the curtain in front of the limelight, and I realized the power of communication, like, you and I would not have had this conversation probably 5 years ago if I was still behind the curtain. So, to
Right.
answer your question, I'm 50-50 with podcasting as well. Like, I figured out podcasting is kind of like my graphic design. And now
Mm.
I'm taking my growth strategies and my systems and I'm applying it to podcasting, like you talked about earlier about getting the emails. So I'm taking podcasting to more of a systematic approach, but I'm being creative with it.
Awesome. I love it. I mean, I haven't started the podcast yet, but maybe if you don't mind, we'll hook you up after this, and maybe you can give me a couple pointers to get rocking and rolling.
Sure thing. I mean, I'd love to do it, man. I think you'll be a good podcast host. I would look forward to seeing you come to fruition for sure.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Well, you have any other questions for me?
No, no. I mean, I definitely appreciate you coming on the show today. I think you definitely gave some great insight to kind of give people like the clarity that we were talking about. So again, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Great. S.A. Grant, over and out.